In a forgotten town with flickering diner lights and mounting debts, Lena Carter scrapes by as a waitress, her dreams buried beneath bills and broken promises. One stormy night, fate crashes literally into her life. A fiery wreck on a desolate road leaves one man clinging to life. With no one around and the rain pouring down, Lena dives into the flames and saves a stranger. But he's no ordinary man. Dominic Rayner, billionaire tech mogul known for building empires and breaking hearts, wakes up to find his life saved by someone who doesn't know his name and doesn't care. The next day, a private jet lands in her dusty town. And when the door opens, the man she pulled from the fire invites her into a world she never imagined. Thrust into boardrooms, luxury, and headlines, Lena's grit becomes the weapon Dominic didn't know he needed. But power breeds enemies, and not everyone wants the waitress-turned-hero to rise. As sparks fly and secrets surface, Lena must decide if she's a visitor in this high-stakes world, or if she's been meant to soar all along. Because sometimes a single act of courage rewrites your entire future, and sometimes it lands a jet. The clock above the diner's counter blinked 6:02 a.m. in tired red digits, just as the bell on the front door jangled. Lena Carter didn't look up. She already knew it was old Mr. Collins coming in for his daily bacon and black coffee, no sugar. Her fingers moved instinctively, coffee pot in hand, one plate ready, 2 eggs on the skillet behind her. Another day, another shift, another set of hours to forget how far she'd fallen from where she thought she'd be at 26. "Morning, Lena," Mr. Collins grunted, sliding onto his usual stool, the leather squeaking beneath his worn jeans. "Morning, Mr. C. Coffee's fresh." She poured it with practiced grace, the mug filling with the dark liquid, as her eyes flicked to the register screen, flashing a low balance alert. Tips weren't good last night, not since they cut hours on the evening rush. "Storm coming," he muttered, glancing at the window. Could see the clouds rolling in like smoke. She nodded. "Guess it's one of those weeks." Mr. Collins chuckled. "Ain't it always?" The small-town diner, with its cracked linoleum and flickering fluorescent lights, held its usual rhythm. Locals trickled in slowly, Janice from the gas station, 2 truckers hauling chicken feed, and Annie from the florist, who brought Lena a single daisy every Tuesday, like clockwork. It was her life, a steady loop of short orders and longer hours. But Lena wore her tired armor. She had to. In the back of her apron was a folded pink envelope, the latest hospital bill for her mother's dialysis. Another reminder that dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford. Once she had imagined being a nurse, maybe a flight attendant, something that didn't smell like grease and fryer oil. But here she was, stuck in the same diner she'd worked at since high school, making minimum wage and barely holding on. The breakfast rush began to wind down around 10. Lena bussed tables, refilled coffee, wiped counters. Rain began to pepper the windows, light at first, then harder. The radio behind the counter crackled a warning about severe thunderstorms moving through the county. She glanced at her phone. Still no texts from her sister. No updates on Mom's meds. No shift coverage offer. Nothing new. At 10:42, the front door swung open with a gust of wind. Lena turned just in time to see her manager, Troy, walk in, soaked and scowling. "You're on your own for lunch," he barked. Sherry called out again. "But I've been here since 5, Lena protested. He just shrugged. Welcome to the diner business." She bit down on her reply. What was the point? He'd cut her hours last week and now expected double coverage. She needed this job. She needed every hour. By 3, the rain was hammering the pavement. Visibility outside the diner windows had dropped to almost nothing. Lena clocked out, tossing her apron in the back room and grabbing her hoodie. The diner was mostly empty now, the flicker of lightning casting momentary shadows across the floor. She stepped out into the downpour, water soaking through her shoes within seconds. Her beat-up Corolla sputtered to life on the 3rd try. She took the long way home, old habits and muscle memory guiding her down the winding county road that cut past the hills. That's when she saw it. Flames through the sheets of rain, barely visible but rising above the tree line like a distress flare. A car, off the road, crashed into a ditch. Lena slammed on the brakes. Her car skidded to a stop on the shoulder as she threw open the door. Heart pounding, breath caught in her throat. She sprinted toward the wreckage. Without thinking, the smoke stung her eyes as she got closer. A luxury car mangled against a tree, engine smoking. One headlight blinks dimly, the other gone. She heard a groan. Someone was alive. She dropped to her knees beside the driver's side. Glass crunched under her jeans. Through the broken window she saw him, bloodied, unconscious but breathing. Lena's fingers shook as she grabbed the handle. Stuck, she braced herself and yanked harder. A surge of adrenaline, a scream of metal, and it gave way. The heat was rising, flames licked near the hood. "Come on," she whispered more to herself than him. "Don't you die on me." And as thunder cracked the sky above her, Lena Carter, small-town waitress, forgotten by the world, dragged a billionaire from the jaws of death, unaware that by tomorrow the sky would part, and a jet would land just for her. The rain hit Lena like a slap the moment she stepped out of her car. It drenched her clothes within seconds, clinging to her skin and chilling her bones. But she didn't care. Her focus was singular, the wreckage ahead. The winding county road was known for its blind curves and lack of guardrails, and tonight it had claimed another victim. But this wasn't some rusty pickup abandoned in a ditch. This was a sleek black car, foreign, low to the ground, built more for luxury than resilience. Flames spat from under the hood, mixing with steam from the shattered radiator. Lena scrambled down the embankment, skidding in the mud. Her boots slipped, but she caught herself on a branch. The metallic scent of burning oil filled her nose as she approached. She could barely see through the smoke, but the shape in the driver's seat told her everything she needed to know. Someone was inside. She yanked at the driver's side door, but it wouldn't budge. She cupped her hands over her eyes and peered inside. The man slumped against the seatbelt. Blood streaked down the side of his face. The airbag had deployed, deflated like a sad balloon. He wasn't moving, but there was a shallow rise and fall in his chest. Okay, she muttered to herself, panic and adrenaline rising in equal measure. She circled the car, finding the passenger side door crumpled but less resistant. With a grunt and every ounce of her strength, she managed to wedge it open just enough to slip inside. The smell inside was worse. Burning plastic and scorched leather. She coughed, eyes stinging. The man's head lolled toward her. His features were sharp even through the blood and grime. Broad jaw, slightly tanned skin, a 5 o'clock shadow that suggested he hadn't been expecting a night like this either. His designer suit was torn, the lapel stained dark. Hey, can you hear me?" Lena shouted over the roar of the storm. No response. She reached for the seatbelt, fumbling to unclip it. Her hands were slick and trembling. Finally, it clicked free. His body slumped forward. "Great," she grunted, pulling his weight toward her. He was tall, solid, at least 6 feet and full of muscle. Moving him was going to be hell. Still, she had to try. Lena backed out of the car, then reached in and dragged him inch by inch. The flames began to hiss louder, closer. A loud pop from under the hood made her duck instinctively. They didn't have long. She got him out, just past the vehicle's frame, when a new roar erupted behind her. The gas tank. "Move!" she screamed at herself, bracing her legs under his torso and hauling with everything she had. They made it another few feet, down into the wet grass, before the car behind them exploded in a deafening blast. The shock wave knocked her sideways. A shower of hot debris rained down around them, but they were out of the direct line. Barely. Gasping for breath, Lena rolled to her knees and checked his pulse. Still there. Slower now. "Just hold on," she whispered. "I've got you." No signal on her phone. The storm had knocked everything out. She was miles from the nearest house, and the road would be invisible in this weather. She glanced at the tree line. Just ahead, like a beacon, was the silhouette of an old barn, abandoned for years. If she remembered right, it would have to do. With every ounce of energy left in her body, Lena lifted the man's arms over her shoulders and dragged him through the wet grass, toward the dark refuge ahead. The barn loomed ahead like a ghost from another time. Weathered planks, a sagging roof, and a yawning doorway that had lost its doors years ago. Lena half-dragged, half-carried the unconscious man through the field, every step feeling like her last. Her back screamed in protest, her arms numb from the effort, but she couldn't stop now. The rain pounded down with relentless fury, turning the ground beneath her into a sucking mire. Her boots slipped twice, knees smacking the mud, but she held fast to the stranger's arm, refusing to let him go. The burning wreck behind them still lit up the sky, a signal flare in the storm. By the time they reached the barn, she could barely breathe. Her soaked hoodie clung to her like a second skin, and her muscles felt like jelly. But inside, there was a semblance of shelter. The air smelled of mildew and rotted hay, but it was dry. Mostly. She cleared a space in the corner where the ground was least saturated and eased him down onto a bed of brittle hay and old canvas. Rain drummed against the tin roof like a war drum. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts as she knelt beside him and checked his pulse again. Still there. Thready, but present. "What the hell were you doing out here?" she murmured, brushing a lock of wet hair from his brow. His skin was clammy. Luxury car on a back road in a thunderstorm? Not exactly subtle. He didn't answer. His eyes remained closed, lips slightly parted, his chest rising and falling just enough to give her hope. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out her phone again. Still no service, no bars, no signal. Useless. Wrapping her hoodie tighter around her, she leaned against the wooden wall and looked at the man beside her. It was impossible not to stare. Even unconscious, he had the air of someone important. Sharp cheekbones, tailored shirt beneath the torn jacket, a leather watch with a diamond-studded face. The kind of guy you saw on magazine covers or in boardrooms, not dying in a ditch outside a town that didn't even appear on most maps. Lightning illuminated the barn, and for a moment she thought she saw a movement in his face, a twitch. Then his eyes fluttered open. They were deep blue, piercing. Even in his weakened state, they locked onto her with a mixture of confusion and pain. "Where?" he croaked, voice gravel and thunder. "Easy," she said, placing a hand on his chest. "You were in a crash. I pulled you out before the car exploded. You're safe. Kind of." His gaze darted around the barn, then back to her. Who are you?" "Lena," she said simply. "Waitress. Savior of dumb rich guys who don't know how to drive in storms." A weak smile tugged at his lips before fading into a grimace. "Hurts. You've got a gash on your head, probably a concussion, and you might have cracked a rib. But you're breathing. That's a good start." "Phone." "No signal," she replied. "You're going to have to ride this one out the old-fashioned way." His eyes drifted shut again, exhaustion pulling him under. Lena leaned her head back against the wall, listening to the storm batter the world outside. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but tonight she'd saved a man from the fire and the rain, and somehow she knew her life would never be the same. The wind howled through the gaps in the barn walls like a mourning widow. Rain pattered down in an unsteady rhythm, sometimes gentle, sometimes deafening. Lena sat with her back against a support beam, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes glued to the stranger breathing unevenly on the makeshift bed of canvas and hay. She had wrapped her hoodie around his torso as tightly as she could, without hurting him further. His skin felt like ice, despite the body heat she tried to share. Every now and then he murmured something, a name, a number, a word that sounded like Elliot. His voice was hoarse, cracked from pain and exposure. Lena wished she had a fire or a blanket or even a flashlight. Her phone had finally died, leaving her and the stranger in complete darkness, except for the occasional flicker of lightning that lit the barn in ghostly relief. The only sounds were the storm and his shallow breathing. "Come on, man," she whispered. "Don't check out on me, not after I just dragged your heavy ass out of a fire." She didn't even know his name. She didn't know why it mattered, but it did. With nothing else to do, Lena started talking. "So, in case you are listening in there, let me tell you a little something. My name's Lena Carter. I work at Rosie's Diner. I've been there since I was 17. I make a mean hash brown plate and pour coffee like it's holy water. I got a mom with kidney problems, a sister who's AWOL, and bills stacking up like Tetris. But tonight, I happen to be the girl who found your crispy luxury car wrapped around a tree." She let out a bitter chuckle. "Life's funny that way, huh?" A particularly loud boom of thunder made her flinch. She glanced at him. He didn't move. "Look, I don't know if you're somebody important or just some idiot with too much money and a broken GPS," she added, leaning closer, "but I need you to hang on. Because if you die after all that work I just did hauling you out of that car, I'm going to be pissed." Another flicker of lightning illuminated his face, and for the first time she saw something shift behind his eyelids. Then his lips moved. "Dom?" Lena blinked. "Dom, is that your name?" A faint nod. "Okay, Dom, good. That's a start." She moved closer, checking his breathing again. "You're going to be fine. Just hold on until morning." They spent the rest of the night like that, him drifting in and out of consciousness, Lena keeping vigil. Every so often she talked to him to keep herself awake and to tether him to the present. She told him about her dog, Rocky, who had run away last year, and the Christmas she once spent sleeping in her car when her mother was in the hospital and she couldn't afford rent. By the time dawn broke, turning the storm clouds into smears of pink and gray, Lena was barely awake herself. She nodded off sometime after 4 a.m., her head resting near his chest to monitor his breathing. She stirred when she heard it, the thumping of helicopter blades cutting through the sky. She scrambled to her feet, stumbling towards the barn entrance. A helicopter hovered above the field. A spotlight scanned the terrain. Moments later, a team of rescue personnel, firefighters and paramedics, came rushing through the field. "In here!" Lena shouted, waving her arms. They flooded the barn carrying gear and shouting questions. She backed away as 2 paramedics surrounded Dominic, she now knew, checking his vitals, securing his neck, moving with brisk urgency. One of them, a man with a radio, approached her. "You found him?" Lena nodded, pulled him out before the car exploded. He was unconscious most of the night. The man studied her, visibly impressed. "You saved his life." She looked past him at Dominic being lifted onto a stretcher. His eyes flickered open one more time. They locked onto hers for a split second, and then he was gone, carried out into the light. Lena stood in the doorway of the barn, the wind blowing the last of the rain from her hair as the helicopter lifted off, carrying away the stranger whose life she'd saved in the dark. She didn't know who he really was. She didn't know what he would remember, but deep in her gut, she knew something had shifted, something big, and it was just getting started. The barn was empty now. The echo of chopper blades had long faded, leaving Lena alone with the sound of wind rustling through the trees and the rhythmic drip of rainwater from the barn's roof. For a few minutes she just stood there, blinking up at the soft morning light leaking through the cracks in the walls, the adrenaline draining out of her like a slow leak. It was over. At least that part was. She wasn't sure how long she stood in that same spot. Her knees wobbled, her back ached. The smell of smoke and wet hay still clung to her clothes. And finally, her brain caught up with the fact that she had spent the night soaked, sleepless, and wrapped around a complete stranger who may or may not have been a billionaire. Her stomach growled. Lena gave a dry laugh and glanced around the barn one last time. There was the crumpled canvas, the impression in the hay where Dominic had lain, the faint scorch marks on her sleeves from the heat of the explosion. Her hoodie was still bundled near where she'd left him. She scooped it up, grimacing at how damp and cold it was now. By the time she climbed back up the embankment to where her Corolla sat parked on the shoulder, her body was screaming at her to collapse. But the sight of her car, mud-splashed and a little crooked, was oddly comforting. She drove home in silence, the sun rising over the trees, casting golden light on a world that had no idea what had happened just hours earlier. Her apartment was just as she had left it, tiny, dim, and cluttered with thrift store furniture. But to Lena, it felt like heaven. She shed her soaked clothes, dumped them directly into the bathtub, and crawled under the covers without even brushing her teeth. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the hospital bill peeking out from under her pillow. Lena awoke in the early afternoon to her phone buzzing aggressively on the nightstand. For a second, she was disoriented. Was it all a dream? The wreck, the stranger, the explosion. She sat up with a groan, hair sticking up at odd angles, and grabbed the phone. 10 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 5 text messages, all from unknown numbers. She rubbed her face, heart thumping. No one ever called her this much, not unless something terrible had happened. With a lump in her throat, she tapped on the latest voicemail. "Miss Carter, this is Agent Nash from the State Highway Patrol. We need to confirm some details from your witness statement last night. Please return our call as soon as possible." Right. She remembered the medics asking her for her name, but everything else had been a blur. Still half asleep, she dialed the number back. After a few minutes of polite questioning, Agent Nash confirmed what Lena had only barely begun to believe. The man she had pulled from the burning wreck, his full name was Dominic Rayner, founder and CEO of Rayner Tech International, one of the fastest-growing tech conglomerates in the country, worth billions. A high-profile executive who regularly graced the covers of Forbes and Wired. The kind of person who traveled with a security detail and whose net worth could buy her entire town 10 times over. And she had dragged him out of a car like a sack of potatoes. "Is he okay?" she asked, biting her thumbnail. "He's stable, transferred to a private care unit in the city. You saved his life," the officer replied. "Honestly, without you, he would have burned in that wreck. He's lucky." "Yeah," Lena said, dazed. "Lucky." After the call ended, she stared at her cracked ceiling for a long time. What the hell was a billionaire doing on a back road outside her nowhere town? And why had he been alone? Something didn't add up. But it wasn't her business. She had done what anyone decent would have done, only not everyone would have run into a burning car in the middle of a thunderstorm. She took a long shower and replayed the night's events in her head again and again. The weight of him in her arms, the fire, the feel of his heartbeat under her fingertips. Dom. That name wouldn't leave her. The news hit her town like wildfire. By evening, the diner buzzed with talk of the mystery savior. Local news anchors had picked up the story. There was drone footage of the wreckage, blurry shots of the barn, and speculation about who had saved Dominic Rayner from a fiery death. But Lena said nothing. She kept her head down, served coffee, and listened quietly as people gossiped around her. "I heard it was a hiker," said Janice from the gas station. No, some off-duty EMT," someone else insisted. Mr. Collins raised an eyebrow at Lena. "You were on that road last night, weren't you?" Lena gave a tight smile. "Just trying to get home before the storm got worse." He didn't push, but his eyes lingered a little longer than usual. By the time her shift ended, she was exhausted again. But as she walked out into the cool night air, her phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown. Number, Miss Carter, this is Ellis Shore. I'm Mr. Rayner's executive assistant. He's asked for you personally. Can we talk? She stared at the screen, heart hammering. Tomorrow, her world might change forever. Lena didn't sleep much that night. She kept replaying the message over and over in her mind. He's asked for you personally. The words haunted her like a melody she couldn't stop humming. Who was this Dominic Rayner really? Why would a man with billions, access to every form of help imaginable, ask for her? She thought about ignoring the text, but curiosity gnawed at her like hunger. She didn't reply, yet. Instead, she did what she always did. She went back to work. The next morning, Lena was behind the counter of Rosie's diner, wearing her cleanest uniform and pretending her life hadn't cracked open like a fault line. The hiss of the griddle, the clink of plates, the whir of the milkshake machine, it was all the same. Familiar, safe. but nothing felt the same anymore. People whispered more now when she passed by, stared a little longer. A few even asked if she knew anything about the crash. She played dumb. It was easier that way. Still, the feeling of being on the edge of something enormous hung around her like static, and when her phone buzzed again just after the lunch rush, she didn't hesitate. Ellis Shore had sent a follow-up. Mr. Rayner would very much like to thank you, in person. Today, if possible, we can send transportation. Transportation? What? Like a town car? But when she stepped outside 30 minutes later, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows was waiting for her. The driver, an impeccably dressed woman with a Bluetooth earpiece, opened the door without a word. Lena stared for a moment, then slid in, heart pounding. They didn't take her to the hospital. Instead, the SUV rolled silently past town limits, through winding hills and open farmland until they reached the private airstrip at Ridgefield, the kind of place reserved for politicians and CEOs who didn't wait in TSA lines. There, on the tarmac, was a jet. Not just any jet, a white and silver Gulfstream with a minimalist logo on the tail, RT, and a flight crew standing by as though they'd been briefed on her favorite beverage. "What is this?" she whispered. The driver gestured toward the stairs. "Mr. Rayner is aboard." Lena hesitated. Everything in her screamed, "This is insane." She was a waitress from nowhere. This was not her world. But she climbed the stairs. Inside, the jet was a floating palace. Plush leather seats, walnut paneling, touch-screen controls for everything. There was a soft humming sound, the ambient quiet of luxury. A man in a tailored gray shirt stood at the far end, leaning on a cane. He turned when she entered. His eyes were as piercing as she remembered. "Miss Carter," he said, voice low and even, "you found me in fire and rain. I thought it was time I returned the favor." She blinked. "You're up. Thanks to you." Dominic Rayner looked like someone recovering from war, his left arm in a sling, a bruised jaw, stitches along his temple. But his posture held strength, command. He wasn't used to being at anyone's mercy, and yet here he stood. Lena's voice caught. "Why am I here?" "To thank you," he said simply, "and to offer you something better than that diner." She shook her head. "I don't want money." "I'm not offering a handout," he said. "I'm offering a job." The conversation in the jet unfolded like something out of a dream. Dominic Rayner spoke with measured purpose. He was charming, but not slick. He didn't try to flatter her or minimize what had happened. He laid it out plainly. "I don't believe in coincidence," he said. "That road, that storm, your timing, it wasn't random. You saved me. Not just my life, but everything I built." Lena raised an eyebrow. "I didn't exactly build Rayner Tech." "No," he said, "but I was on that road because I was about to make the worst business decision of my career. That night, I was running from my own company." She tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. "I was going to sell it off, cash out, walk away. I was fed up, tired. The empire became the cage. But lying there, knowing I might die, I realized I didn't want it to end. You reminded me of something I lost along the way." She stared at him, stunned. "You're saying I changed your mind?" "I'm saying you reminded me what people like us are capable of when we don't give up." A silence fell between them. Then Dominic leaned forward slightly. "I want you to come work for me. Not as charity, as someone I trust." Lena's jaw tightened. You don't know me. I know enough. You saved me without hesitation. That says more than 1,000 resumes. She laughed despite herself. So what's the job? He smiled. We'll figure that out together. Her heart thudded as she looked out the window, the airstrip shimmering in the fading afternoon light. For the first time in years, Lena felt like her life might be about something again. Okay, she said. Let's figure it out. 3 days after the crash, Lena Carter found herself boarding a private jet once again. Only this time, she wasn't being summoned. She had said yes. Yes to the job. Yes to the unknown. Yes to the most outrageous, terrifying offer of her life. The Gulfstream G700 gleamed under the late morning sun, its silver wings catching light like blades. It felt unreal, less like stepping into a workplace and more like crossing into another dimension. Ellis Shore, Dominic's sharply dressed assistant, met her at the cabin door. Welcome aboard, Miss Carter, he said with a practiced smile, the kind that didn't quite reach the eyes. You can call me Lena. Of course, right this way. Inside the aircraft was more than a jet. It was a moving luxury suite. The smell of polished leather and espresso filled the space. Dominic sat near the rear, dressed in a soft gray sweater and slacks, a sling still cradling his injured arm. He looked like a man still healing, but the steel in his eyes had returned. Good morning, he greeted her. Welcome to Rainer Tech, Mobile Edition. Lena raised a brow. Is this where you conduct interviews now? He chuckled. Only for people who saved my life. She settled into the seat across from him, nervously smoothing the wrinkles in her thrift store blazer. It didn't belong here, she didn't belong here, but she'd come anyway. Today, Dominic said, leaning back, we're flying to New York. I want you to see the real operation, not the news coverage, not the stock prices, the people, the ideas, the problems. We're going to fix some of them together. She blinked. You're serious? As a collapsed lung, he said with a faint grin. The engines hummed to life. The jet taxied down the runway and lifted into the sky, taking Lena not just thousands of feet above her old life, but into a future she hadn't dared imagine. The New York skyline was a jagged line of ambition against the horizon when they landed at Teterboro. From there, it was a sleek black car, an express route into Manhattan, and a silent ride past rows of glittering buildings until they pulled up in front of a glass tower that seemed to scrape the clouds. Enertech Global Headquarters. Lena stared at it like it might vanish if she blinked. You ready? Dominic asked. She forced a smile. Not even a little. But she followed him in. The lobby was all marble, chrome, and power. People turned to look as Dominic entered, some with awe, others with fear. He moved slowly, still recovering, but every step radiated presence. Lena stayed close, clutching the strap of her borrowed handbag like it was a shield. They took a private elevator to the 42nd floor, the executive level. Dominic gestured toward a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a panoramic view of the city. This is where I nearly signed the deal to sell it all, he said. Now I want to show you what I'm keeping instead. One by one, department heads entered, tech leads, operations, public relations. Lena sat quietly in a corner while Dominic led a brief, intense debrief. But then something strange happened. They started looking at her. At first, like she didn't belong. Then, like they weren't sure. And then finally like they were curious. Dominic ended the meeting with a simple announcement. "This is Lena Carter. She's officially part of my personal team. You'll be seeing a lot more of her." A murmur of acknowledgement followed. Eyes widened. Some smiled. Others frowned. And just like that, Lena Carter, small-town waitress, was now standing in the war room of a multi-billion-dollar empire. Later that night, they sat in a small private lounge inside the building, something between a spa and a wine bar, reserved for the top echelon of Rainertech. Dominic had ordered tea instead of champagne, his recovery taking priority over celebration. Lena sipped hers slowly. "So this job, what exactly is it?" Dominic leaned forward. "I don't want a corporate echo chamber. I want someone outside the system, someone who tells me the truth." "You want me to be your conscience?" "Something like that." "And you trust me just like that?" "I trust my instincts," he said, "and I trust the woman who dragged me out of a fire." Lena hesitated, searching his face. "Why me?" "Really?" Dominic didn't flinch. "Because you have something I lost. Perspective, courage, the ability to see people as people." She looked away, heart pounding. "I'm not polished, Dom. I don't have a fancy degree or know how to talk in boardroom lingo." He smiled. "Exactly." Silence stretched between them for a moment, warm and strangely intimate. Then he said, "I want to offer you a formal role, a kind of advisor/truth teller. Name your title. You'll work directly with me." Lena stared at him. The billionaire. The man she saved. And now the man who had just asked her to join him at the top. She didn't say yes. Not yet. But something in her heart whispered that the real journey was only beginning. 2 weeks later, Lena Carter walked into Rainertech headquarters, not as a visitor, but as an employee, complete with a badge, a temporary office space, and a sleek company-issued tablet she still didn't quite know how to use. She wasn't just part of the company, she was part of his team. Her official title was still being defined. Strategic Outreach Liaison was the working draft, though Dominic had jokingly called her his reality filter. Whatever the label, her job was clear: give honest feedback, observe without bias, and never, ever say what people wanted to hear just to keep them comfortable. And already she was making waves. Her first day, she'd questioned a pitch from the marketing department that Dominic himself had greenlit. Everyone else in the room had gone silent, waiting for her to get chewed out. Instead, Dominic leaned back, smiled, and said, "Go on." Now, people noticed when Lena spoke. They also whispered when she passed by. The office corridors gleamed with quiet prestige. Glass-walled meeting rooms, smart whiteboards, lush indoor gardens. She often felt like she was walking through a science fiction movie. Her modest wardrobe stuck out among the tailored suits and designer shoes. But Dominic didn't seem to care. And slowly, neither did she. She spent hours in meetings observing the rhythm of power, the unspoken alliances, the subtle pressure of optics. And through it all, she learned fast. Still, when the elevator doors closed behind her each evening, Lena exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all day. Because stepping into this new world meant learning how not to drown in it. It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into pushback. Lena was a novelty at first, a fresh voice, a curiosity. But novelty wore off fast in a world where pedigree mattered more than instinct. It started with small things, cold smiles, polite brush-offs in meetings, invitations that never came. Then came the open disdain. "She's cute," murmured a senior VP when he thought she was out of earshot. Dominic's little mascot. One executive made a point of accidentally including her in a string of emails, questioning whether hiring an unqualified outsider set a dangerous precedent. Lena didn't flinch. She'd worked 12-hour shifts, survived months without heat, and yanked a bleeding man from a fire. Office gossip wasn't going to break her, but it wore her down in quieter ways. She found herself double-checking her words, second-guessing her instincts, wondering if maybe, just maybe, she didn't belong. Dominic noticed. They were reviewing vendor proposals late one evening in his office when he paused mid-sentence and said, "You're pulling back." She froze. "What?" "You've gone quiet in meetings. You used to call me out more." She hesitated. I don't want to step on toes." He gave her a long look. "Lena, you didn't step on my toes the night you hauled me out of a burning car. I'm not about to be offended if you question a budget plan." She looked down. "It's different here. I'm not like them." "Exactly. That's why you're here." He reached across the desk, nudging a folder toward her. "Don't let them teach you to shrink." She didn't say anything, but that night she slept better than she had in weeks. Over the next few days, Dominic began showing her more than the company. He showed her his world. It wasn't just boardrooms and brand strategy. It was the weight of legacy, the cold calculations of high-stakes business, the loneliness that came with leadership, and the cracks in his armor. He took her to a children's robotics lab funded by his foundation, where he smiled for photos but spent more time just watching the kids build things. He told her how he'd grown up in foster care, how coding had saved him from getting lost in the system. "Everyone sees the billionaire," he said once, "not the kid who taught himself C++ in a group home library." They flew to Seattle for a late-night crisis meeting. Lena sat beside him in silence on the return flight, watching the lights flicker below while Dominic nursed his shoulder and stared at nothing. "Have you ever thought about quitting?" she asked. He blinked, then smiled faintly. "Only every day. And yet, here you are. Because sometimes the thing that breaks you also becomes the thing you fix." She didn't reply, but when they landed and Dominic asked her to ride back in the car instead of taking her separate drop-off, she didn't say no. Because she was beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, the cracks in his world were exactly where her own light could shine through. The invitation had arrived in a silver envelope. Lena turned it over, unsure whether it was a mistake. The Easton Global Philanthropy Gala wasn't the kind of event people like her were invited to. The kind of event where champagne cost more than her rent and dresses were rented from stylists, not off the rack. But the note inside was clear. "You're coming with me. Dress sharp. D." Dominic picked her up in a Blacktown car, looking sharp in a deep navy tux. Lena wore a midnight blue gown borrowed from the Rainertech wardrobe team, fitted, elegant, terrifying. Her curls were swept up. Diamond studs glinted at her ears. For the first time, she didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. The gala was held in a marble ballroom under crystal chandeliers. Politicians, celebrities, CEOs, They all mingled in curated opulence. Lena held her head high, even as whispers followed her like perfume. That's her, right? The waitress girl? What's she doing here with Raynor? Dominic offered his arm. Ignore them. But ignoring them was harder than it sounded, especially when she was approached by Cecilia Lang, Dominic's former flame and a rising tech VC, wrapped in silk and condescension. So nice to see you here, Cecilia purred. Dominic always had a thing for charity cases. The words stung. Lena managed a tight smile. And you must be the reason he prefers substance now. Cecilia blinked. Dominic grinned. Later, as they danced under the chandeliers, Lena whispered, "You brought me here to prove a point, didn't you?" He looked at her, seriously, softly. "I brought you because you belong." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. By the following week, Lena had had enough. The gala had been a beautiful lie, an illusion of acceptance. In the days that followed, the whispers turned sharper, the questions turned personal. One morning she arrived at her desk to find a gossip article printed and left anonymously in her chair. From fry cook to fortune, is Dominic Raynor's mystery woman his latest acquisition? She stared at it for a long time. Then, without a word, she tore it up and threw it away. But it stuck with her. The pitying looks, the snide comments, the emails from concerned insiders questioning her role. Even Ellis, who had been cool but civil until now, began challenging her input in meetings. "Are you really qualified to weigh in on a product launch?" he asked pointedly in front of the team. Lena stood up. "Are you really qualified to question someone whose insights just saved the company $1 million in marketing missteps?" The room went quiet. Dominic didn't speak, but his nod told her everything she needed to know. Still, the pressure was mounting. That evening she cornered Dominic in his office. "I don't think this is working." He looked up. "What do you mean?" "I'm not one of you, Dom. I don't speak this language. I'm tired of feeling like the strayed dog you brought home." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "Then maybe it's time we stop thinking of it as my world and start building yours." She stared at him, breath caught, because buried in the frustration was something deeper, a promise. It was midnight when Lena wandered out onto the rooftop garden, an executive-only space with soft lighting, manicured paths, and views of the entire skyline. A hidden sanctuary above the madness. She didn't expect to find Dominic there, but he stood at the railing, jacket slung over his shoulder, watching the city pulse below. He heard her approach, but didn't turn around. "Couldn't sleep." "Too much on my mind." "Me too." For a while they just stood there, quiet, the hum of traffic below, the soft rustle of leaves. Then she said, "Why did you really bring me in, Dom?" Not the PR answer, the real one. He sighed. "Because I was drowning, and then you pulled me out, literally and metaphorically." She didn't speak. "I forgot what it meant to care about people, not shareholders, not press, people. You reminded me." She turned toward him. "And now I'm drowning in a world I don't understand." He finally faced her. "Then let me pull you out this time." There was a pause. Their eyes met, something unspoken stretching between them. "I'm not used to being anyone's priority," she whispered. "You were mine before I even knew your name." He stepped closer, gently tucking a stray curl behind her ear. The city blurred behind them. The air shifted, and for the first time since the crash, Lena felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was starting to live. The next morning, Lena walked into Rainertech with a new sense of resolve. No more hiding in corners. No more trying to fit into a mold that was never made for her. If she was going to do this, she'd do it her way, with the same grit that got her through double shifts and hospital bills. What she didn't expect was Maribel Chan waiting outside her office. Maribel was the company's chief operating officer, a razor-sharp strategist with ice in her veins and heels that could kill a man. She rarely spoke to Lena beyond a cool nod. Most assumed Maribel barely tolerated her. Today, however, she stepped inside without invitation. "We need to talk," Maribel said, closing the door behind her. Lena sat straighter. "About what?" "About this company and about Dominic." That got her attention. "There's a personnel crisis in the logistics team," Maribel continued. "Internal reports are conflicting. HR's flailing. Dominic asked me to loop you in. Said you have a way of cutting through BS. Lena blinked. "He said that?" Maribel nodded once. "He also said you're not afraid to get your hands dirty." It was the first time someone in this building had treated her like an asset instead of an anomaly. Together they dove into the issue. By noon, Lena had uncovered that the conflict stemmed from a toxic middle manager, one who was shielding underperformers while silencing whistleblowers. By 3 p.m., that manager was quietly reassigned, and by the end of the day, Maribel looked at her and said, "You're not just surviving here, you're dangerous. I like that." It wasn't a friendship, but it was the beginning of something solid. The next storm didn't come from the sky. It came in the form of a crisis memo labeled URGENT, Client Trust Breach. Dominic's executive team gathered in the boardroom within the hour. Lena sat beside him, her badge now upgraded, her presence no longer questioned, at least not openly. The issue? A leak of sensitive client data. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to rattle investors and spark media speculation. "We're narrowing it down to 3 departments," Ellis explained, projecting a list of names on the wall. The breach came from inside. Dominic's jaw clenched. "Contain it quietly. No PR panic. What's our action plan?" A flurry of technical jargon followed. People scrambled to prove they had answers. Lena listened, then raised a hand. Everyone looked at her. "Has anyone checked the human side?" she asked. Ellis frowned. "We're focused on systems right now." "Well, the system didn't leak the files. A person did. Who's been working overtime? Who's resentful? Who's been passed over for a promotion? That's where you find your mole." The room fell silent. Maribel nodded slowly. "She's right." Within 24 hours, Lena's theory led to a disgruntled analytics associate. The breach had been a cry for attention, foolish, traceable, but effective. Dominic didn't say much at the press debrief, but when the reporters left and the lights dimmed, he turned to Lena and said simply, "Well done." She didn't need a trophy. That one sentence meant everything. It happened quietly, no confetti, no celebration. Just a simple email from Dominic's office that read, "Subject, new appointment to all staff. Strategic advisory role, Lena Carter. Effective immediately, Lena was officially named Strategic Crisis Consultant to the CEO. There were no balloons, no applause, just nods and sideways glances. Some bitter, some were impressed, some are afraid. But Lena didn't care, because that morning she stepped into her new office, on the 40th floor just down the hall from Dominic, with a clear view of the skyline and her name on the frosted glass. She called her mom first. "Wait," her mother rasped after Lena explained. "You're not working at the company anymore. You're working with the man who owns it." Lena laughed. "Yeah, weird, right?" "Baby," her mom whispered, voice cracking with pride. "You're living something I never even dared to dream." That afternoon, Lena walked past a group of junior analysts arguing about strategy. One of them, wide-eyed, asked, "Wait, is that her?" Lena turned, smiled, and said, "It's me, and I've got notes." Later, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, Dominic found her staring out at the view. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like I climbed a mountain I didn't even know I was on," she replied. He nodded. "You're only halfway up." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Because for the first time she wasn't just surviving chaos, she was mastering it. The jet touched down just after noon. Lena hadn't been home in weeks, not since her life turned from diner counters and late-night bill juggling into high-stakes boardrooms and private terminals. But now, Dominic had insisted. "You need to breathe," he told her. "Go home, rest, see your roots. We'll be here when you're ready." The car ride from the airstrip into her town was surreal. Everything looked smaller than she remembered. The sidewalks narrower, the sky wider, the familiar rust and charm of a place that hadn't changed while she had evolved completely. The diner was still there, of course. Same flickering neon sign, same smell of bacon grease wafting through the air. She didn't go inside. Instead, she walked straight to her mother's house. Modest, clean, a little worn around the edges. The place where everything had begun. Her mother answered the door with tears already in her eyes. "You look like you belong in a magazine," she whispered. Lena laughed and hugged her tight. "I brought groceries and a new dialysis monitor, top of the line." They cried together in the kitchen, surrounded by sounds and smells that felt like home. For the first time in years, her mother's color looked good. Her spirit looked lighter. "You saved someone else's life," her mom said. "But you saved your own too." That night, the town held a quiet celebration in her honor at the community center. People Lena hadn't seen in years hugged her, clapped her on the back, toasted to her courage. It wasn't the gala, but it was real, and it mattered more. The next morning, Lena took a walk down Main Street. It was early, shops still closed, streets still quiet. The sunrise cast long shadows between the brick buildings, painting everything in soft orange and gold. That's when she saw him, Derek, her ex. They'd dated during her early diner days back when dreams were hazy and survival was day-to-day. He looked older now, a little rough around the edges, standing outside the gas station in a hoodie and work boots, sipping coffee from a plastic cup. Their eyes met. "Lena," he said, blinking. "Hey, Derek." He let out a low whistle. "You look different." She smiled politely. "I've been working in the city. With that billionaire guy, right? Everyone's talking." She nodded. "I guess you finally got out," he said, and there was something bitter in it. "I did. You still working at Sullivan's?" "Yeah," he muttered, looking away. "Things are what they are." They stood there for a beat. Two people who'd once shared everything, now separated by choices and timing. "I always knew you'd find a way out," he added, but it didn't sound like a compliment. I hope you find yours too, she said, and meant it, because she wasn't angry. She had just moved on. When Lena returned to New York, everything had changed. While she'd been reconnecting with her roots, the wolves had been circling. A hostile takeover bid. It had come from a rival conglomerate, Strathmore Ventures, a group Dominic had once refused to partner with. Now they were backed by aggressive investors and a public smear campaign. The moment she stepped off the elevator, Maribel pulled her aside. "We're in trouble," she said flatly. "What kind?" "The kind that ends in blood or bankruptcy." Dominic looked different too. Thinner, tense. His cane was back in hand. He was holding it together, but barely. "They think I'm weak," he told her. "Injured, distracted, that I've lost my edge." "Have you?" she asked. His jaw tensed. "Not if you're here." He brought her into the war room, closed-door sessions with lawyers, economists, and top-level strategists. For 3 days they planned, analyzed, and dug through data. But it wasn't enough. "We need a game changer," Dominic muttered. "Something that shifts the narrative before they do." That night, over late-night takeout in his penthouse office, Lena pitched something bold. "Let me talk to the press," she said. Dominic looked stunned. "You hate cameras." "I hate lies more." He studied her. "What are you thinking?" "A story," she said. "The truth. How Rainer Tech saved communities, helped real people. Human faces, real voices, including mine." It was risky. But she had one advantage Strathmore didn't. She wasn't manufactured, she was real. And in this war, truth might just be their sharpest weapon. Lena stepped off the Rainer Tech jet in Geneva, wearing a fitted charcoal blazer, boots that made her feel invincible, and a plan sharper than the Alps. The media had already gathered. Word had leaked that Dominic Rainer would be attending the Global Tech Sustainability Forum in person despite his injuries. What they hadn't expected was that he wouldn't be the one speaking first. Lena walked into the press room with Dominic at her side, but it was her name on the press card. Lena Carter, Strategic Crisis Consultant to the CEO. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. She stepped up to the podium, heartbeat in her throat. "You're probably wondering what a former waitress is doing here," she began, voice steady. "I wondered the same thing, until I realized that's exactly why I should be here." She told them her story. The crash, the rescue, the climb. She spoke of how Rainer Tech had reached into communities that others ignored, how the people behind the tech were just as important as the innovations themselves. "I didn't go to business school," she said, "but I know what loyalty looks like. I know what a second chance feels like, and I know integrity when I see it." By the time she finished, even the most jaded reporters leaned forward. Dominic didn't speak at all that day. He didn't have to. They returned from Geneva riding a wave of momentum. Lena's speech had gone viral. Investors took notice. Morale inside Rainer Tech soared. But the plane ride home was quiet. Not strained, just full of unspoken words. Dominic sat beside her, reading analytics on his tablet. She stared out the window at the clouds. Finally, she asked, "Did I do okay?" He turned to her, gently set the tablet down, and said, "You made me proud." Silence, then softer, "You made me feel." The air between them shifted. It wasn't the adrenaline of danger anymore. It wasn't gratitude or admiration. It was something older, deeper. When the jet landed, the city lights below twinkling like static, Dominic reached for her hand. His fingers were warm, steady. Lena didn't pull away. Later that night, he knocked on her sweet door, not as a CEO, not as a symbol, but as a man. And when their lips finally met, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't planned. It was the result of weeks of tension, of trust, of something that had been building since that first night in the rain. Her pulse raced, but it wasn't fear. It was the first time in a long time she let herself want something real. It should have been their high point, but betrayals never announce themselves with warning. It started with a confidential investor memo surfacing in the media, followed by a hacked internal dashboard. Then came the leak. Detailed schedules, private financials, even internal chat logs. Ellis. He had always been polite, efficient, calculated, but underneath he'd grown bitter, jealous, unseen. When the evidence surfaced, deleted files recovered, digital fingerprints confirmed, it was undeniable. He had sold data to Strathmore in exchange for an executive role, once the merger forced Dominic out. Dominic's fury was quiet, terrifying. "You worked beside me for 10 years, he said during the confrontation. "Why?" Ellis didn't flinch. "Because she replaced me." His eyes flicked toward Lena. "Dominic used to listen to me. Now he listens to her, a waitress." Lena stood in the doorway, the words slicing clean. She expected Dominic to explode, but he didn't. He simply turned to security. "Escort Mr. Shore off the premises, permanently." And just like that, Ellis was gone. But the damage wasn't. The leak put everything at risk. Investors panicked, stock dropped, partners wavered. Dominic's board called for an emergency vote. "Step aside, Dominic," they said. "Let someone else clean this up." And with his reputation on the line, Dominic Rayner, untouchable, unshakable, was forced to resign. The boardroom was silent. Dominic stood at the head of the long mahogany table, the skyline glittering behind him like a city of stars that no longer felt like his. They had voted. It was done. He removed his Rayner Tech badge, laid it on the table, and nodded once. Stoic, composed. But Lena could see the devastation in his eyes. After everyone filed out, she stood beside him, unsure what to say. "You built this company from a dorm room," she said. "You bled for it." He let out a hollow laugh. "And I just lost it because I trusted the wrong person." She stepped closer. "You didn't lose it. Not really." He looked at her. "I'm not sure I even know who I am without it." "You're still the guy who hires for heart. The guy who shows up when no one else does. The guy who gave me a jet seat when I didn't even ask for a coffee." He blinked, lips twitching despite himself. Outside, reporters were gathering like vultures. The press had their story. Dominic Rayner dethroned. The empire was shaken. But as Lena watched him gather his things, she didn't see a man defeated. She saw one who had just realized he still had something more powerful than any company. A second chance. The office was cold without him. Meetings were tense. Departments drifted. And though the company hadn't crumbled, it was teetering, one bad quarter away from collapse. Lena watched it all unfold with growing fury. "They don't care about people anymore," she told Maribel over lunch. "They're just trying to plug leaks with policy." Maribel raised an eyebrow. Then change it. Lena paused. Excuse me? You said it yourself. You see what they don't. Show them what you'd do differently. The idea hit her like a spark. That night she stayed late at HQ, whiteboarding alone in a vacant conference room. Pages piled up. Arrows, diagrams, quotes from employees she'd actually talked to in the field. She called it Project Ground Up, a model that shifted Rainer Tech's culture from top-down power to people-first growth. Embedded community hiring, mentorship pipelines, crisis preparedness roles for frontline workers. The next day, she walked into a room full of suits, executives who had seen her as a footnote and presented the plan. Some scoffed, one laughed. But when Maribel backed her up with hard numbers and real-world examples, the tide began to turn. By the end of the week, the interim CEO had resigned, and by the end of the month, Dominic Rainer was reinstated because of her. The return wasn't grand. There was no parade, no press conference, just an early morning email titled Subject Executive Update to all staff. Or CEO transition. Dominic was back, officially, but this time he wasn't just returning to reclaim a throne. He was returning to rebuild. With Lena, the first order of business was rolling out Project Ground Up. Lena's plan became the foundation of a new Rainer Tech initiative: authentic culture, transparent leadership, empathy-driven innovation. It wasn't about PR anymore. It was about people. Employee satisfaction soared. New hires came from community centers, not just Ivy Leagues. Retention improved. Even the stock bounced back, quietly but confidently. One afternoon, after a long day reviewing expansion blueprints, Dominic walked Lena out to the rooftop garden, the place where they'd first confronted their fears together. "I owe you everything," he said. "No," she replied. "You just remembered who you are." He turned to her, eyes soft. "And you showed me who I could be." Then he held out a small leather box. Inside was a card, embossed, elegant: Lena Carter, Vice President of Culture and Innovation. Her hands trembled. "You earned this," he said, "and it's only the beginning." She smiled, because for the first time in her life, her title wasn't about proving herself. It was about becoming who she already was. Lena didn't expect a party. She didn't expect the hangar either. It was a crisp morning when Dominic drove her out to the private airstrip just outside the city. No reporters, no fanfare, just him, a quiet smile, and the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath their feet. Inside the hangar sat a sleek, compact jet, smaller than his, but just as striking. Silver with a soft blush undertone and a single emblem painted under the cockpit window: LENAC. She stared, speechless. "You're not mine anymore," Dominic said behind her. "You're your own force. This jet's for you, to run the Foundation anywhere in the world, whenever you want." Lena's heart swelled. The foundation he was referring to, Rise Together, the nonprofit she and Dominic had created together, was designed to support first responders, grassroots leaders, and survivors of trauma. Lena had poured her soul into it, and now it was real, fully funded, fully operational, fully hers. She turned to him, barely holding back tears. "This is—" "I know," he said gently. She walked up the jet steps and stood in the doorway, looking back at the man who once fell from the sky and landed in her life. What if I don't know where to go first? She asked. Dominic's smile was soft but certain. Then just fly until you find something worth fighting for. She didn't need more direction than that, because this time she was in control. 3 months later, the jet soared above the clouds, carving a path toward the horizon. Lena sat by the window, a folder in her lap filled with blueprints for a new Rise Together hub in Mexico City. Across from her, Dominic reviewed a pitch deck. They'd fallen into rhythm now, partners in every sense of the word. No more titles, no more walls, just truth, respect, and something that had blossomed between them like a sunrise. They flew together often, worked together. But this flight was different. Midway through, Dominic stood, reached for the overhead compartment, and pulled out a small velvet box. Lena looked up. "Is that—" He dropped to one knee. In every crash, there's a second of silence, a heartbeat before the chaos. You gave me that heartbeat, Lena. You gave me everything after it, too. She was frozen, breathless. I want every layover, every landing, every storm and sunrise with you. Will you marry me? Tears slipped down her cheek as she laughed, overwhelmed and shining. Only if I get to fly the next leg. He grinned. Deal. She took his hand, and as the jet soared toward the future, Lena Carter, waitress, warrior, wonder, knew one thing for sure. The sky was never the limit. It was only the beginning.